Switzerland, Oxfam International in England, the major international body that measures and studies inequality, released the following stunning statistic. The 162 richest individuals in the world today together own more wealth than the bottom half of the population of this planet, roughly 3.5 billion people. Wow, that is uneven development taken to an extreme. 162 people dispose of more wealth, make the decision of how to use that wealth, and do it in such a way that half the people of this earth have to share an equal amount of wealth, which makes that half, the poor half, die earlier than they otherwise would, suffer from diseases that we know how to cure, have food insecurity, that's the popular name, hunger. And guess what? Those people are upset. They are angry. They are bitter. With the advent of television and the internet, they know exactly how other people live and how they don't. And they wonder what is going on, and they are susceptible, aren't they, to being angry. And you can call it populism, you can call it whatever you like. It is a product in good part of the uneven way capitalism has developed, producing such wealth alongside such poverty. But there are many other examples. Here in the United States, think of the different regions. Our two coasts, west and east, are rich, are developed, compared to large parts of the interior that are not. I remember once visiting the state of Maine, a beautiful place, noticing that on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean, Maine is a developed, prosperous, but the minute you go inside, it's a very, very different story. And it's been that way for a long, long time. And you can replicate that all over the world. Northern Italy versus Southern Italy. Paris versus the rest of France. On and on and on. Eastern Europe versus Western Europe. Capitalism produces really grotesque imbalances. There's the whole difference in Europe in the role we call colonizer, in colonialism. We have the rich core of Western Europe, North America, and Japan, marauding over the rest of the world, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and capitalism making one part very, very rich, highly developed, and another part the opposite. This is a system that produces imbalances that are socially disruptive, undermine community, and are bitter causes of war and conflict. Now, it's true, sometimes there's a pushback. Sometimes the unbalanced, the poorly balanced, the neglected, the downtrodden push back and fight. And then for a small period of time, you may have some balancing. Let me give you an example from American history. In the depths of the Great Depression of the 1930s, the gap between rich and poor was extreme as masses of people lost their jobs, lost their incomes, and they pushed back. They forced the New Deal on Franklin Roosevelt, who had to give them jobs, Social Security, unemployment compensation, and for a while, the imbalance in the United States between the minority who are capitalists, employers, and their top executives, and the mass of people was narrowed. But as soon as that temporary adjustment was over, by 1945, you already resumed normal capitalism. The Depression was behind us. The World War II was behind us. And what happened? Over the last half century, we resumed the normal capitalism, which is an unbalanced, uneven development. Let me take the point another step. Capitalism not only reproduces unevenness, but it becomes part of our consciousness. I'm going to take a dramatic example that I have used before, but it illustrates this point too. At the beginning of the 20th century, the city we know of as Detroit was a relatively small city, Located at the confluence of three rivers, which is where cities often develop all around the world, where traders and goods and services move. But it was transformed by capitalism. Capitalists decided, for a variety of reasons, to build a particular industry that really took off, the automobile industry. Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, most of you know that story. And boom, from the 1930s up until the 1970s or 80s, this city went from a small, relatively sleepy river town to the great center of American capitalism. Many other parts of the United States fell into one or another kind of long-term depression, but Detroit boomed. Capitalism made development happen there, even as other parts of the United States were finding themselves shrinking. New England, for example, which was once the center of a thriving textile industry, saw all the textile plants shut down. To this day, you can travel in many parts of New England, seeing empty, long brick buildings where factories once hummed, where nothing happens now. Many of them have been sitting empty for decades. And so the capitalists built Detroit. Then in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, those capitalists, for the normal reasons of capitalism, looked to make profits and realized they could make more profits someplace else. So they moved auto production to other parts of the United States, to Mexico, to Canada, and more recently to China, and so on. And what happened to Detroit? The flip side of uneven development. From being a boom lifted up from the 1930s to the 1980s, let's say, they became the story of disaster. Detroit's declining. The simple way to describe it, in 1970-75, we're talking about Detroit as a city of 2 million people. Today, Detroit has less than 700,000 people in its population. That's uneven development. Notice here, and this is a very key point, that capitalism, where it builds a part of the society or a part of the world up, seems necessarily to crush another part down. That's what I mean when I say it reproduces unevenness. It doesn't solve the problem of unevenness by giving us evenness, a balanced development. The best you can hope for is, if you're on the wrong end of imbalance, is that you get moved to the right end. But of course, you'll have to notice, unless you're blind, that that's at the expense of some other place that went the other way. Imbalance is capitalism's normal way of functioning, and it always has been. Even today, if you look at the parts of the American economy, of American capitalism that are successful, Amazon, Google, the high techs, yeah, they produce the Jeffrey Bezoses, one of those people with $100 billion of wealth. But there are vast parts of the United States that have no wealth at all, where people barely get by. Tens of millions of people like that for every one Jeffrey. That's uneven development within a capitalist framework. And the important thing is not to think that it's necessary. This is not about nature. This is not about automatic. This is not about neutral. This is a product of capitalism.